In the quiet village of Zamble, cradled by the rolling golden hills and watched over by ancient baobab trees, life moved to the steady rhythm of tradition. The villagers rose with the sun and retired as it set, their days filled with simplicity and toil. But the arrival of Kofi, a boy born under the rare eclipse, would alter this rhythm forever. Kofi's entrance into the world had been marked by a celestial spectacle. The skies darkened at midday, and the sun glowed red, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to his arrival. The village seer, a woman of whispers and visions, declared him touched by the gods, a vessel of fate and fortune. At first, Kofi's childhood was unremarkable, filled with play, laughter, and the watchful eye of his widowed mother, Abina. But as he grew, the whispers about him began to swell, carried on the winds of Zamble like the songs of distant griots. The revelation of the gift. Kofi's transformation began during the sacred initiation rites of manhood. At 13, he stood with other boys at the edge of the sacred grove, their faces painted with the ochre of courage and their hearts pounding with anticipation. The elder, Nana Obesai, led the ceremony, her voice commanding respect as she chanted ancient incantations. Each boy was given a concoction brewed from the legendary Ndala herb, said to awaken the strength of their ancestors and prepare them for the burdens of manhood. When Kofi drank, the changes were almost immediate. His body seemed to hum with energy, his muscles rippled with newfound strength, and his posture straightened as though the gods themselves had reached into his soul and claimed him as their own. What no one foresaw, however, was the more peculiar aspect of this transformation. By his 17th year, Kofi's reputation had spread across the village, not just for his striking physique, but for an undeniable magnetism that drew every gaze. His chest was broad, his shoulders strong, and his skin glowed with a deep, earthen warmth, as though he had been sculpted by the hands of a master artisan. But the whispers were not just about his beauty. Among the women of the village, stories began to circulate, hushed tales of an unparalleled gift. Those fortunate enough to experience Kofi's affection spoke of nights unlike any they had ever known. The rumors grew louder. Kofi was a man who could last 4 hours in a woman's embrace, his touch leaving them trembling with desire and aching for more. The Queen's allure. At the heart of Zamble's royal compound lived Queen Ioka, wife of King Munsa. Ioka's beauty was legendary, her elegance unmatched by any woman in the kingdom. She walked with the grace of a lioness, her every movement commanding attention. Her skin was smooth and luminous, a deep, rich brown that seemed to shimmer in the sun. Her waist curved delicately, accentuating hips that swayed like the rhythm of a ceremonial drum. Her eyes, almond-shaped and lined with kohl, could pierce the strongest man's resolve, and her voice carried the warmth of honey with the authority of a queen. Men across Zamble had dreamed of Ioka, but she belonged to the king, a man known for his power and pride. Yet, despite her elevated status, even Ioka was not immune to the whispers of Kofi. His name reached her ears one evening as she sat on her royal terrace, listening to the gossip of her handmaidens. For hours, one of them whispered with a giggle, her cheeks flushing. "Impossible," Ioka said with a smirk, though a flicker of curiosity danced in her eyes. That night, Ioka could not sleep. The tales of Kofi consumed her thoughts, igniting a fire within her that she had not felt in years. She resolved to see this young man for herself. The Festival of Drums. The opportunity arose during the Festival of Drums, a celebration of music, dance, and unity. Kofi, now 21, was the center of attention. His lithe yet muscular frame moved with the ease of a panther as he danced among the villagers. His laughter was infectious, his charm undeniable. Ioka arrived in her royal carriage, her presence sending ripples of awe through the crowd. Dressed in a flowing gown of gold and crimson, adorned with jewelry that glittered like the stars, she descended gracefully, her every step a proclamation of her unmatched beauty. When her eyes met Kofi's, the air between them seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. Kofi, unaccustomed to feeling nervous, found himself captivated. Ioka's gaze held him in place, her lips curving into a subtle smile that promised secrets untold. The queen and the commoner. That evening, under the cover of darkness, Ioka summoned Kofi to the royal gardens. He arrived cautiously, his heart pounding. To stand in the presence of the queen was a privilege few men could claim. Ioka stepped forward, her scent, a heady blend of jasmine and sandalwood, enveloping him. She studied him, her eyes lingering on the sharp lines of his jaw and the confident set of his shoulders. "They say you are unlike any man," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "And they say you are the finest of all women," Kofi replied, his voice steady. Their conversation was brief, their connection immediate. What followed was a night that would change the course of Zamble's history. Kofi's legendary endurance met Ioka's unparalleled allure, and their union was nothing short of electric. Ioka, a woman accustomed to control, found herself undone by the young man's passion. The consequences. The weeks that followed were filled with chaos. Women throughout Zamble began to bear Kofi's children, their bellies swelling with the proof of their encounters. Among them was Queen Ioka, her secret threatening to unravel the fragile peace of the kingdom. The king, suspicious of his wife's newfound glow, began to investigate. Meanwhile, the men of the village, overcome with jealousy, plotted to bring Kofi down. The consequences of Kofi's growing legacy. The seeds of scandal. The village of Zamble was no stranger to gossip. News traveled faster than the beating drums, and whispers of Kofi's prowess had long since become the most popular subject of conversation. But as weeks turned into months, these whispers turned to shock and scandal. One by one, women began to show the signs of pregnancy, swollen bellies and radiant faces that could not hide their secrets. At first, it was the wives of farmers, then the daughters of merchants, and finally, to everyone's disbelief, Queen Ioka herself. The queen's pregnancy was a matter of public celebration, for King Munsa had long hoped for an heir. Yet, beneath the surface, Ioka's secret burned like a smoldering ember. She knew the child she carried was not her husband's, and the weight of that truth threatened to undo her. Kofi, unaware of the storm brewing, continued to live as he always had, confident, carefree, and seemingly invincible. But the men of the village had grown restless. Their jealousy, once tempered by admiration, had turned into resentment. The meeting of the men. It was on a moonless night that the men of Zamble gathered beneath the great baobab tree. There were farmers, hunters, and even a few of the king's guards among them. Their leader was Kojo, a blacksmith whose wife had recently given birth to a son with Kofi's unmistakable features. "This cannot go on," Kojo said, his voice sharp as the blades he forged. "Our wives, our daughters, they belong to us. And yet, this boy walks among us, sowing chaos and shame." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "What would you have us do?" asked Tund, a fisherman known for his temper. "We must confront him," Kojo replied. "He has taken too much. If the king finds out, it will not just be Kofi who suffers. It will be all of us." The men agreed to act, but their plans were divided. Some wanted to banish Kofi, while others whispered of darker solutions. The king's suspicion. Meanwhile, in the royal palace, King Munsa began to grow suspicious of Ioka's behavior. She was distant, her usual sharp wit dulled by an uncharacteristic quiet. At night, she held her growing belly as if shielding it from the world. "Something troubles you," Munsa said one evening, his voice gentle but firm. Ioka forced a smile. "It is only the weight of the child, my king. I dream of the day I will present you with an heir." But Munsa was not convinced. He called upon his most trusted advisor, Afua, an elder woman known for her insight and discretion. "Watch the queen," he instructed, "and find out if there is more to this pregnancy than meets the eye." Kofi's awakening. For the first time in his life, Kofi began to feel the weight of his actions. The women who once sought him out now avoided his gaze, their laughter replaced by worried whispers. Even his own mother, Abina, looked at him with a mixture of pride and concern. "Kofi," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "You are a man now, but you must think like one. A man's strength is not just in his body, but in his choices." Her words lingered in Kofi's mind, but he dismissed them. He believed himself untouchable, a favored child of the gods. The confrontation. The men's plans came to fruition during the annual harvest festival, a time of celebration and abundance. Kofi, as usual, was at the center of attention, his laughter echoing above the drumbeats. But this time, the mood was different. The men approached him in a group, their faces set with determination. "Kofi," Kojo began, his voice loud enough to silence the crowd. "You have taken what is not yours. You have dishonored us." Kofi stood tall, his expression calm. "I have taken nothing that was not freely given," he replied. A murmur spread through the crowd. The women, many of whom had shared Kofi's bed, avoided eye contact, their faces flushed with shame. "You think yourself above the laws of men," Kojo continued. "But even you cannot escape the wrath of the king." At that moment, a royal messenger arrived, his presence commanding immediate attention. "The king summons Kofi to the palace," the messenger announced. The trial. Kofi stood before King Munsa, his heart pounding in his chest. The queen sat beside the king, her face a mask of composure, though her hands trembled in her lap. "Kofi," Munsa said, his voice as cold as the steel of Kojo's blades. "I have heard troubling things about you. Women swollen with child, families torn apart. All because of you." Kofi opened his mouth to speak, but the king raised a hand. "You will tell me the truth," Munsa continued. "And if I find that you have defiled my queen, you will not leave this palace alive." The room fell silent. Ioka's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time, Kofi felt fear. The revelation. As the tension reached its peak, Ioka rose to her feet. "Enough," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. The room turned to her, the king's eyes narrowing. "I carry Kofi's child," she confessed. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The king's face twisted with rage, and his hand went to the hilt of his sword. "You have betrayed me," Munsa spat, his voice a mixture of fury and heartbreak. But before he could act, Nana Obesai, the elder, stepped forward. "My king," she said, her voice commanding attention. "This is no ordinary man. Kofi's gifts come from the gods themselves. Perhaps his actions, though reckless, were meant to teach us something. The legacy, the king, though reluctant, spared Kofi's life, exiling him instead to the distant mountains. But Kofi's legacy could not be erased. The children born of his unions carried his strength, his charm, and his unyielding spirit. Over time, they grew into leaders, healers, and warriors who reshaped the destiny of Zambul. Consequences of Kofi's growing legacy. The Exile Begins. Kofi's exile was swift and merciless. He was stripped of his place in the village, escorted by armed guards to the base of the distant Kalanji Mountains, a place known for its isolation and danger. The villagers, gathered to witness his departure, were divided in their feelings. The women wept openly, some clutching their swollen bellies, while the men stood stoic, their relief tempered by a lingering sense of unease. As Kofi stood at the edge of the village, his mother, Abina, approached him one last time. Her eyes, filled with tears, bore into his. "My son," she whispered, "you are a child of the gods, but even gods face trials. Out there, beyond the mountains, you must find who you are meant to be." Kofi nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of loneliness settle on his shoulders. The life of exile. The Kalanji Mountains were as beautiful as they were unforgiving. Towering peaks stretched toward the heavens, their rocky faces etched with the scars of time. The air was crisp, the silence broken only by the occasional cry of an eagle or the rustle of wind through the trees. For weeks, Kofi wandered, his body enduring the harshness of the wilderness. His once proud demeanor was slowly replaced by a quieter strength, tempered by solitude and reflection. He built a shelter from fallen branches and leaves, hunted game with tools fashioned from stone, and learned to listen to the rhythms of the land. But the nights were the hardest. Alone beneath the vast canopy of stars, Kofi's mind turned to the life he had left behind. He thought of the women he had loved and the children he would never know. He thought of Queen Ioka, whose bold confession had both saved and condemned him. The Queen's Dilemma. Back in Zamble, Queen Ioka's position grew increasingly precarious. Her confession had spared Kofi's life, but had unleashed a storm of turmoil within the palace. King Munsa, though outwardly composed, had become colder and more distant, his once gentle words now edged with bitterness. The queen, now visibly pregnant, found herself shunned by the court. Her maids whispered behind her back, and the noble women avoided her gaze during gatherings. Yet, Ioka held her head high, determined to protect the child growing within her. One night, as she lay awake in her chambers, she heard a soft knock at her door. It was Afua, the king's trusted advisor. "My queen," Afua said, stepping inside. "The king plans to send you away once the child is born." Ioka's breath caught in her throat. "You would exile me?" Afua nodded. "He believes it is the only way to restore his honor. But there may be another way." "What do you mean?" Ioka asked, her voice a mixture of hope and suspicion. "Your child is special," Afua said. "Born of a man touched by the gods. This child could unify the village, perhaps even the entire kingdom. But only if you act now. Leave Zamble before the king can carry out his plan. Find Kofi. Together, you may forge a new path. The journey to reunion." Ioka, driven by a fierce determination, disguised herself as a commoner and fled the palace under the cover of darkness. With only a small bag of provisions and the guidance of Afua's wisdom, she embarked on the treacherous journey to the Kalanji Mountains. The journey tested her in ways she had never imagined. She braved raging rivers, climbed steep cliffs, and endured nights of freezing cold. Her once delicate hands became calloused, her royal garments replaced by simple robes. But through it all, she pressed on, her heart guided by the faint hope of finding Kofi. The king's wrath. When King Munsa discovered Ioka's disappearance, his fury was unmatched. He summoned his guards, ordering them to search every corner of the land. "She will not escape me," he vowed, "and neither will Kofi." The king's obsession grew darker, his mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. He began to question even his closest advisors, suspecting betrayal at every turn. The once respected ruler of Zamble now seemed a shadow of himself, driven by the twin demons of pride and humiliation. A new beginning. After weeks of travel, Ioka finally reached the Kalanji Mountains. Her strength was nearly spent, her body weary from the journey, but the sight of Kofi's makeshift shelter renewed her resolve. Kofi, emerging from the forest with a bundle of firewood, froze at the sight of her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ioka stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "I couldn't stay," she said simply. Kofi dropped the firewood and rushed to her, his arms wrapping around her in an embrace that spoke of both love and regret. For the first time in months, he felt whole, the rise of a new kingdom. Together, Kofi and Ioka began to build a life in the mountains. Ioka gave birth to a son, whom they named Kwame, a child of extraordinary strength and wisdom even in infancy. Word of their life in exile began to spread, drawing others who felt disillusioned by the rigid traditions of Zamble. Over time, a new community formed, one that valued equality, love, and freedom over strict adherence to the old ways. Kofi, once seen as a symbol of chaos, became a leader, guiding his people with the wisdom he had gained through his trials. The final confrontation. Years later, King Munsa, now old and frail, launched one final attempt to reclaim his honor. Leading an army into the Kalanji Mountains, he sought to destroy what Kofi had built. But when he arrived, he was met not with resistance, but with an invitation. Kofi and Ioka welcomed him into their home, offering him food and shelter. The king, humbled by their generosity, realized the futility of his anger. In the end, Munsa returned to Zamble, leaving Kofi and Ioka to thrive in peace. Their story became a legend, told across generations as a testament to the power of love, resilience, and redemption. Story alert: the prophecy of Kofi's children, an African tale of unity and betrayal. Let me know below the comment section what your moral lesson was from this video. And thanks for watching this video, and also subscribe to this channel. Turn on the notification to get notified for new released videos.